For the last week or so, I've been absolutely hammering on a number of different projects. And one thing I tried that ended up being really fun, interesting, and fruitful was to start to build MCP servers into my applications. Because what I had found was, as I've talked over the last several months about being in the era of the personal app, a lot of that really relies on clunky UI interactions or just a lot of time that it takes to really hone in to make those UI interactions not clunky. And one of the things that we can use to get around that, of course, are direct API calls. And we've seen a number of iterations over the last year or so and just different approaches. We've seen MCP servers were the hot topic. And then we're like, oh no, we're afraid of MCP servers. That's old news. We're moving to CLIs. At the bottom of all of this is an API that powers your application. And you can connect to that API in a number of different ways. And the more I've been thinking about this recently, the more I think that what really matters comes back to this idea of splitting the separation of concerns in non-deterministic systems and deterministic systems. And what that really means to me is that I want my agent to be able to run really fast and do a lot of things, but I also want to protect that agent from itself and from blowing up everything that it has access to. And so we try to keep that access nice and controlled, but we need to open it up enough or create systems that are wide and flexible and powerful enough that we can move faster. And so what I've done this week is I've built three different MCP servers for three different applications, and I want to show you one of them. And then I want to dive into one specific pattern that I uncovered that I like a lot in the process. So let's take a look. So this project is called Botanicard, and basically it's a little personal app that helps me collect information around my houseplants and my garden. And really, what I wanted to use it for ultimately was to get better, to learn about what's working and what's not working. So when I get to the next season or I pick up the next houseplant, that I do a little bit of a better job. And it's great to be able to collect all this information. I mean, we can take a look at the garden, which has gotten slightly out of control, and many of these things are still at the very beginning of their life, and hopefully their life is nice and long and lasts the entire season. But every time I want to come in here and provide updates, it's just a ton of clicking around, pulling my photo from wherever it is, coming down to notes, adding a note, uploading a photo. And it got tedious enough that I was like, as nice as it is to have this information where I know it exists and to have it in a way that is designed for me to be able to work with it well, it's really tedious. And if it's really tedious, I'm just going to abandon it eventually. And so instead of building a whole new system and instead of reworking the UI, what I decided to do was build out an MCP server thinking that, hey, I'm already interacting with agents on a regular basis. So if I could just wire up an agent here, then it could work. It could work with this API quite a bit better. And yes, we could just give it direct access to the API. But the nice thing about the MCP servers is it's a little bit easier to discover these tool calls, and you can kind of group endpoints together in a way where the API doesn't necessarily have to be grouped in that way. And so if we take a look, for example, back to this dill plant, let's say I wanted to update this. Now what I can do is I can go over to Claude. I open my gardening assistant project, and then let me pull up a photo real quick. All right, we're going to drag that photo in here. And then I'm going to say, this is the one remaining dill plant left from the original group of three that I planted. And I don't have to do anything else because I have a skill baked in here. So I can write Botanicard update, and then it should know what to do. And part of what it's going to do here is it's going to take the high efficiency image and it's going to convert it to a JPEG. It's going to keep it, it's going to aim to keep it less than 1 megabyte, but it definitely won't exceed 1.5 megabytes. And then it's going to analyze the photo and suggest some sort of update that I can make changes to before it goes live in the system. Now, while this is running, I want to talk to you about the really cool pattern that I uncovered. And there's probably many different ways to do this, but it has to do with image uploads. Because the way I started this process was I was basically like, hey, Claude, build me an MCP server into this application. And what I noticed was that the MCP spec requires that you use base 64 images. And so that's what we defaulted to. And then I was checking the application and we are like, these tiny, tiny images because they had to be compressed down to send them over the wire. And it just wasn't working very well. That's not what I wanted. I wanted the 1 to 1.5 megapixel JPEG that was as large as it could be so we could at least have the detail. I could have agents in the future study those images so that I can get better tips. And so the base 64 approach wasn't really working for me. So I did some research and came up with a different flow. Let's take a look at it. Now, this seems like a lot, but I'm going to walk us through this. And one thing I want to state here is that what I did first was I tried to create a new endpoint where the agent could just hit that endpoint and upload the image. The problem with that was that the agent then needed to know the key. And I didn't want to give an agent an API key. I didn't want to store it out in the open. And I just didn't want to go through that auth process every time. And we've already got authentication baked into the configuration of the MCP server in the first place. And so I really wanted to avoid having duplicate authentication methods. And so this is what we came up with. I really wanted to avoid duplicate authentication methods. And so I came up with a different approach. And here's how it works. So at first, the agent calls this prepare uploads tool call. And essentially, what it does is it is asking the API, it's hitting this prepare upload endpoint through the MCP server. And what that is doing is it's creating this empty upload box. And that box has a one time unique token that then gets sent back to the agent. So at this point, there is no image, nothing exists. The agent just says, I want to upload a photo. I'm ready to upload the photo. And it does that through the MCP server so that we can take advantage of the authentication in that MCP connection. So we're connected through the MCP server. We request the right to upload a new image. So the API then creates this empty shell of an upload with a unique key, and it gives that key back to the agent. And so then the agent can take that key, or here we're calling it a token. And so then the agent has that token and then it can hit our upload endpoint. So at this point, we're bypassing the MCP server. The agent got the instruction it needed, and now it can go directly to the API. It doesn't need an API key because it has this token that is unique to this empty upload. So if there are no empty uploads with that token, then we get a failure. And it's all happening pretty snappy. So it's not the most secure thing, but in an application like this that just doesn't move a lot of content around, it's a pretty decent method. And so then the agent can hit that endpoint, and as long as it hits and uses the right token for that empty upload, then that file gets uploaded, and we know that upload is up there, and so we can finalize it next, and then we can attach it to some other piece of data, which in this case, in this system, is called a note. And so then that is stored as a blob in the Netlify platform, and there's a reference to that blob in the database. And so when you request the image through the browser, it just hits that same API endpoint as any other image that's stored in there. And then we grab the photo from that photo store and return it. And so looking at that kind of request string a little bit, so we hit the prepare uploads, we get this upload URL back, and then have that upload handle. And then we use the token that we got back to hit our direct API endpoint. And then we can finalize that upload and get the appropriate key back, which we can use to update the node and attach that image to it. So let's go check back on Claude, and we can dig in here and we can see this is where it called prepared upload. So it had already taken the high efficiency image and it converted it to a JPEG, and then it analyzed it, and then it hits this prepare upload endpoint. And you can see it's got that file name and it gets this unique, whoops, hit the wrong one. And so it gets the unique key back, or that upload handle. There it is. There it is. And then we hit finalize upload with that handle. And there we go. We get the full key to that image. And now we just need to attach it to a note. And so this photo has already been analyzed, and we say, okay, this is the last of the original three. The lone survivor is in a peat pot out on the deck, leggy and thin stem, but the feathery foliage is healthy and green. Yep, that seems so great. Post it. And now let me compress this stuff up here again. So we'll let that run for a second, and then we should be able to check. Okay, that's done. So let's go back to our app. And now we have a new image, kind of hard to see, but we have a new image and we have this note that got added and this image is attached. So you can see how much faster this is, because now I can just walk around the garden, I can take a bunch of photos, I can drop them all into Claude and I can be like, analyze these, convert them and put them in the system. And it's just so much faster to work that way when I have those endpoints already in place, because the UI has to work that way. But the really cool thing is that we don't have to build those really intricate workflows into the UIs. We can just have the endpoints available. And then the MCP server helps these agents kind of negotiate how to stitch the pieces together. And it makes it really easy to build these one-off custom workflows. And then you can do what I did here, which was then you can develop a skill when you know that that workflow is this repeatable process. And it's just so much easier than sinking a bunch of time into really specific, rigid workflows within the app. I'm Sean C. Davis. I hope this was helpful. I'm sure I'll have more updates here about this project and about MCP servers as I move along. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.